My Uncle Bill could doctor warts. At funerals and family reunions, he'd wander around and ask you if you had any warts he could buy. And if you did, you'd say yes, and he'd give you a penny, or sometimes a dime, and overnight, the warts would go away. I come from a multi-generational Ozark family, which means I come from a family of stories about healing and healers like Uncle Bill. Or when my grandma went to a witch woman, as she called her, to cure a bad rash on her feet, and she said that the woman just moved her fingers over the feet and said some words she didn't understand, and the rash went away. Growing up, I never thought these stories were weird, although I did think it was odd none of my friends knew about the hoop snake or had any home remedies of their own. But I didn't start thinking about my heritage until college, when I came across the holy trinity of Ozark folklorists. That's Mary Parler, Vance Randolph, and Otto Ernest Rayburn. Through their works, I started to understand that the stories I grew up with weren't just unique to my family, but were a part of this tapestry of Ozark folk culture that I didn't even know existed. Eventually, I got interested in Ozark folk medicine specifically, and I collected remedies from my family and friends and neighbors, and then traveled around collecting remedies from healers also. And the more I looked at these remedies, the more I started to see that there is this complicated and complex system of folk medicine here in the Ozarks that few people even know about. This folk culture, this folk healing tradition, which has made up people's lives for hundreds of years, has been buried due to mostly secret remedies passed through families that don't go outside of the local community very often. When we look at folk healing in general, we can divide it up into remedies based upon science. We can divide it up into remedies based upon faith. But we have to remember that our ancestors wouldn't have made this distinction. For them, healing was healing both the body and the mind together. These distinctions may be useful as folklorists. They may be useful as anthropologists. But moving forward, we have to look at this as a body of knowledge, not just separate pieces. A remedy worked not just because of the contained chemical compounds in the plants, but because the doctor would sit with the patient and pray with them, or they would ask them what is contributing to their illness in their life. They would sit next to them and take care of them, not just give them a remedy and move on. We can divide this folk healing tradition into two aspects: healing the body and healing the mind. When we talk about healing the body, we look at the botanical knowledge, the herbal knowledge that people would have had here in the Ozarks. This is a mixture of European herbal preparation traditions and indigenous plant knowledge from the New World. One remedy I like to talk about, and it was famous enough for Vance Randolph to mention in his Ozark Magic and Folklore, is wild cherry whiskey. It was a remedy that people would have had in their homes. It was simple enough to make. In practice, it is essentially what we call a tincture, which is plant matter soaked in alcohol so as to create an extract. In this case, the alcohol of choice would have been whiskey, or what's more likely, a homemade moonshine. And this process came directly from the distilleries of Europe. In fact, we can look at many of the recipes that are collected by these old rural families, and we can see exact recipes in medieval manuscripts. These recipes flow through these family lines, translating over to the plants that would have been found here in the New World. The plant used in wild cherry whiskey is, of course, wild cherry, specifically the bark. This is a tree native to North and South America, and for centuries it's been used as a very effective expectorant. An expectorant means that it helps clear chest congestion and will actually help you pass phlegm. This tonic is a really good representation of Ozark folk medicine. It is a mixture, a melting pot of a lot of different traditions, and we can see that over and over again in Ozark folklore and folkways. It's a mixture of a lot of these different cultures, mixed in such a way that sometimes we can't even piece them apart. We have a high biodiversity here in the Ozarks. We have hundreds of medicinal plants here, and a lot more that haven't even been discovered yet. It's because of this diversity in plant life that around the turn of the 20th century, pharmaceutical companies targeted the Appalachian Mountains and the Ozarks for root digging, as they called it. They would hire root diggers, which were rural people who knew the plants, knew what they did, and knew how to find them. They would go out and dig up these very powerful medicinal plants, and then the pharmaceutical companies would sell them across the South in pharmacies and dispensaries. It's because of this popularity of our plants that many of our species were nearly extinct here. One example is the Ozark witch hazel, Hamamelis vernalis, which grows alongside its common witch hazel cousin and is very hard to differentiate unless you know what you're looking at. Around the turn of the 20th century, pharmaceutical companies would come in the springtime into the Ozarks and strip all of the witch hazel trees of all their leaves to take back to make astringents for cosmetics, mostly. This nearly killed our Ozark witch hazel. But because of synthetic astringents that came on the market, we were able to have that plant get reestablished. And actually today it's pretty common to see around. It's no longer considered endangered. We have other very powerful medicinal plants here, some of which many of you maybe have heard of. These were all plants that would have been sold throughout the South. They're not very popular in use today for a lot of different reasons. But at one point, everybody would have known these plants. Everybody would have had these remedies as a part of their life. We have bloodroot, whose sap was actually used topically to remove skin cancers, warts, moles, a lot of different skin issues. Sassafras, some of you have probably had some sassafras tea. It was used as a flavoring in root beer at one time. It was also used in the spring as a tonic, which meant it helped tonify your body. It helped clear the blood, as they say, which is one of many euphemisms for a laxative. We have Solomon's seal, which was seen as a heal-all. It was even seen as such a powerful plant that it was worn almost as an amulet against illness. We have ginseng, which at one time was plentiful here, but because of overharvesting, it almost became extinct. Now, luckily, it's making a comeback just because people don't really harvest it here in the Ozarks. They go to the Appalachians to dig it out and find it. This plant was used as another tonic plant. It was a powerful plant that was used for a lot of different illnesses. It was also used as a stimulant. And we have golden seal. Golden seal roots is a powerful astringent that was used mostly in mouthwashes for a lot of different gum diseases, tooth diseases. It was also used internally for a lot of digestive complaints. We have a unique opportunity with these plants. Because of all the information that we have at our fingertips, we have an opportunity now to be able to do more valuable research on the plant chemical compounds that we find here. Not just brush them aside as folk remedies, but actually see how these chemical compounds work on the body. One example I like to give is of poke root. Some people have probably eaten poke greens in the springtime. They kind of have a weird flavor, and if you're not used to them, they'll kind of clean you out, as they say. But the root traditionally was used on the skin, which isn't recommended. The chemical compounds contained in the root specifically can give you a chemical burn. It can actually slough off layers of your skin. But researchers today are actually isolating chemical compounds from these poke roots to be used in rheumatoid arthritis medications. It's a very powerful anti-inflammatory when it's diluted. We have a unique opportunity to look at these plants and actually work them into our medical system going forward. We also have to look at the medicines that heal the mind or the spirit. These are medicines we might call psychosomatic, which means it works on both the body and the mind. These are medicines like the fashioning of certain talismans, verbal charms, prayers, all of these methods that we might call folk magic or superstition. A folk doctor here in the Ozarks would have been in a unique position because of their knowledge of the human condition. Not only did they know how to heal with plants, but they knew a fair amount of folk psychology too. They were able to sit with a patient, pray with them, make sure that their home was being cleaned, their kids were being taken care of, so they had the opportunity to heal. A folk doctor might recommend a plant-based medicine like an herbal tea, but they would accompany that herbal medication with a certain ritual. They may say, drink this tea, but leave a little bit at the bottom, and then take that to a river and pour it in the river and let it carry your sickness away. Or pour it on the roots of a tree, and as the tree grows, your body will grow stronger. We may look at this with a skeptical eye, but basically what this is doing is including the patient in on their own healing process. We see time and time again that when people feel comfortable, when people feel like they are at home, when people feel like they are being taken care of, their healing process is increased tenfold. They're much more likely to heal through that. That's why we still recommend chicken soup when you have a cold. We recommend bundling up in bed, not just because you're getting the rest that you need, but because of this sense of comfort that goes along with the healing process. We can see the inclusion of traditional medicine in the modern world, specifically in Alaska right now. There are certain groups of indigenous people who are bringing traditional healers into the hospital setting so that a traditional healer will actually be at the bedside of the patient. They will pray with them, they will sing with them, they will prescribe certain herbal medications as long as it doesn't interfere with what the doctor is doing. This pulls the patient into this altered sense of reality where they are being taken care of by not only their community, but their cultural identity itself. The traditional healer is a cultural figure, a community figure, who is able to identify with the patient in such a way that actual healing happens through that connection. We might call it a magical connection, but I think that the folk healers would just see it as making a patient comfortable so that they can allow themselves to heal. I'm a healer. I heal the body, I heal the mind, I heal with plants, I heal with prayers, I heal with songs. Whenever I'm working with a patient, I like to think back to my Uncle Bill and what he would have done. Approaching a patient where they are, asking them the simple question, do you want to be healed? Bringing them into their own healing process, and then allowing them to feel like they are being healed, not just by the words he was saying, but by this loving embrace of a community, the loving embrace of a cultural identity. And so I look at my Uncle Bill as an example of who I want to be in this world as a healer. And that is a bridge between the healing traditions of my past and the healing traditions yet to come. Thank you.